everyone. I'm Elliot Ruga, Policy and Communications Director at the New Jersey Highlands Coalition. I want to welcome everyone to the third Northwest New Jersey Rivers Conference, a project of the 11 organizations that are collaborating on projects within the New Jersey Highlands region and the Paul and Skill Watershed here in northern New Jersey, which is one of two regions of focus in New Jersey under the larger four-state Delaware River Watershed Initiative, the DRWI. Overall, over 50 organizations are participating in an unprecedented, coordinated, multi-phase project to improve water quality in the entirety of the Delaware River watershed. In March, we will begin our third three-year phase of this initiative. The Northwest New Jersey Rivers Conference is our opportunity to take a step back and discuss our projects, to invite the public, academia, municipal, county, regional, and state officials, and other interested stakeholders to participate in our work. And we hope to form mutual relationships of mutual benefit. Why is our work important? We all know that water is essential for all life. We are fortunate to have plenty of it here in northern New Jersey, and projections indicate that we will continue to have plenty of it as the climate continues to warm. What are increasingly challenges are the availability of clean drinking water and flooding. Here, in the more densely populated northern half of the most densely populated state in the country, we are fortunate to have the fourth lowest cost of retail residential drinking water. This is primarily due to the improbable amount of forested land we have protected from development, mostly here in the Highlands. How we continue to protect these forests from development, disturbances, and fragmentation will be increasingly important because the pressure to develop them only increases over time. Flooding and the outbreaks of harmful algal blooms need solutions, and whether we can get on the same page to solve these threats will be key in maintaining the high quality of life we enjoy here in northern New Jersey. I have the pleasure of introducing the Northwest New Jersey Rivers Conference distinguished plenary speaker, Olivia Glenn, Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Justice and Equality at DEP. Prior to Commissioner LaTourette being named commissioner, there was an environmental justice person, but it was Commissioner LaTourette who made environmental justice and equality a priority and its own division within the department, with a professional staff headed by a highly qualified deputy commissioner. Ms. Glenn was appointed in July 2021 to prioritize the advancement of New Jersey's environmental justice and equality goals, to weave environmental justice and equity into all aspects of the department's work. Previously, Olivia led the Division of Parks and Forestry, managing its 450,000 acres of natural and historic resources since 2018. From 2003 through 2009, she worked as the division's Urban Initiatives and Outreach Coordinator. Olivia was a member of the DEP's Environmental Justice Advisory Council, leading its efforts in outreach, education, and land management. Olivia also has worked in the nonprofit sector at the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, where she focused on urban environments, making parks and trails more readily available and accessible to greater Philadelphia residents, with a focus on Camden. In 2018, the Camden Collaborative Initiative honored her with the Camden Environmental Hero Award. Olivia earned a bachelor's degree in environmental studies at Dartmouth College. She holds a master's degree from the Yale School of the Environment, where she wrote her master's thesis on park revitalization in Camden. Without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing Olivia Glenn. Olivia.
Thank you, Elliot. So good afternoon. I am delighted to be here to join you for the third Northwest New Jersey Rivers Conference. And I want to thank Julia Summers of the Highlands Coalition for inviting me to be here with you today. For my presentation today, I want to give an overview of environmental justice in New Jersey, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. With many thanks due to Governor Murphy, Commissioner LaTourette, and for residents of overburdened communities across our state who have been the voice of environmental injustice over the course of decades. So to understand where we've been, it requires us to zoom out and look at environmental justice from a national scale. President Clinton issued an executive order in 1994, which was the launch of the federal government addressing environmental justice. And to just begin, the definition that the EPA has set for environmental justice is as follows. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And I will give you a bit of a teaser to let you know that here in New Jersey, we do fully support this definition, but we do plan to undergird it even further with not just consideration to environmental burdens, but also to environmental benefits. And absolutely many of New Jersey's environmental benefits with our remarkable open space inventory is located in the Highlands region of the state. So just to take a closer look at what do we mean by environmental justice and how do we distinguish it from equality, equity, and justice? I use this visual. When we look at equality, equality is that we have provided a crate for everyone to see a sports game. Everyone has the same supports to watch the same game, but everyone needs a different level of support. So when we employ the tool of equality, we do ensure that everyone gets the same supports and equal treatment, but the outcome is not always the same. And an example of that for how we function in government is if we send an email out to every municipality to advertise a grant opportunity. Some municipalities have full-time staff. Some municipalities have part-time individuals, or those who may be full-time but can only dedicate a part of their time to being able to address the grant opportunity. So it does not level the playing field. But we know that we do have to have some structure in place, the wooden fence, so that there's some perimeter between the spectators and the players. So there is a need for order, but it's figuring out how do we do it best. So equality does not achieve it for us. When we look at the picture in the center, we see a demonstration of equity. Equity ensures that everyone gets the supports that they need. So it levels the playing field so that all of the spectators are able to see the game with a level of protection, with the fence being in place. But justice implores us to go further. It makes us step back and even consider, why do we need a wooden fence to begin with? Why can't we have a cyclone fence that is see-through so it still creates the parameters that are needed to separate the players from the spectators, but it enables everyone to see it with the resources that they have? And so when we look at justice, we strive to address the underlying cause of the inequity. And this is a strategy that we seek to employ in New Jersey as we think about how we advance and further environmental justice. So to put this into context for why does this even matter? There has been substantial research that has been put out over several decades that demonstrates that environmental justice is a real issue. Here is one example in looking at air pollution. Everyone produces waste, but not everyone lives near where the waste is disposed or dumped, or live adjacent to major roadways. This graphic depicts racial inequities of how much air pollution Blacks, Latinx, and whites emit versus inhale. This is from a 2019 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which found a racial gap between who causes air pollution and who breathes it. And what this chart shows is that Latinx Americans are exposed to 63% more pollution than they produce. African Americans are exposed to 56% more air pollution than they produce. And non-Hispanic white Americans are exposed to 17% less air pollution than they produce. So as you can see from the graphic here, that Blacks and Hispanics experience a pollution burden, while whites in America experience a pollution advantage. Another example that touches on land and water considerations is looking at redlining, which is something that has happened on the ground all across our country. And I like to use redlining as an example because it shows a program that was a government initiative trying to create some parameters and a framework to address a challenge of the time. So I'm just going to take you back in time for a moment to give you some context to understand exactly what redlining is. Back in the 1930s, there was the creation of a government agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. It was created in the first 100 days of the Roosevelt administration, and it provided billions of dollars for the rescues of banks, thrifts, and distressed homeowners. The bill passed the democratically controlled House of Representatives by 383 to 4. Holk helped restructure the American mortgage lending market by creating and standardizing several of its elements, such as home appraisals. Holk supported the training of home appraisers and employed hundreds of appraisers throughout the 1930s, working in concert with the nation's realtors to inaugurate and advance real estate appraisal as a profession. Holk's Department of Research and Statistics drew upon its network of realtors, developers, lenders, and appraisers to create a neighborhood by neighborhood assessment of more than 200 cities in the country, and some cities in New Jersey were included in this as well. The assessments included demographic data, economic reports, and the color-coded security maps later deemed infamous as instruments of quote-unquote redlining. Holk has long been seen as both a savior to the housing sector, pulling us out of the Great Depression, but simultaneously it was a force for racial segregation. And it wasn't out of place for its time at all. But today, when we look at the practice that was employed less than 100 years ago, we would all today be pretty mortified to make specifications about people of color and immigrants. This policy today still largely shapes where people live and their dynamics with banks, realtors, and real estate markets. So it has impacted land use practices, the building of highways, flooding considerations, as many of the areas that were redlined in these maps were low-lying and flood-prone areas, and in communities with less tree canopy. And these communities weren't invested in if they were redlined. And this is one of the underlying reasons for our Overburdened Communities maps today with our environmental justice law, and why we look to reduce stressors and increase benefits in these communities. The URL that you see here is a link to a workshop series that was provided by the EPA. And on March 4th, they hosted the first session, the first of 5 sessions on environmental justice and systemic racism. And in that first session, the EPA focused on redlining and current environmental challenges, including flooding and low-lying areas. And just as we're looking forward at some of the remedies that are needed, we have to understand some of the underlying challenges that created what we see on the ground today. And so to zoom into New Jersey, the talk of environmental justice is not new at all. It's been since the civil rights movement of the 1960s, where grassroots communities nationwide have documented disproportionate environmental burdens endured by poor communities and communities of color. These disparities were not only raised in urban centers, but also in rural communities. And New Jersey is certainly no exception. From our industrialized urban centers to our rural migrant farming communities, these concerns have been present in New Jersey as well. For decades, nationwide, stories from communities and academic research institutions have documented these disparities. And so New Jersey is certainly no exception. And so this here, when we're looking at framing environmental justice, I just want to pay homage to the fact that there were those back in the 1960s who were seeking environmental justice within our overburdened communities. It was in 1991 that those groups of communities came together from all around the nation to define environmental justice. And it was in 1994 with what I showed you as the EPA's definition of environmental justice when that was issued by President Clinton through his executive order. New Jersey launched its first environmental justice true, deeply rooted initiative in 2004 by the passing of New Jersey's first environmental justice executive order that was issued by Governor McGreevey. In 2018, Governor Murphy issued not only a new environmental justice executive order, but also got us on track for 2020 with the passage of the nation's strongest environmental justice law. So New Jersey absolutely has a strong legacy in furthering environmental justice. And so in this picture here, the picture on the left is when Governor Murphy signed the environmental justice law in September 2020. And the picture on the right is when Governor Murphy signed the environmental justice executive order in his first 100 days in office back in 2018. And so I briefly want to talk about framing environmental justice through our executive order. What I really appreciate about the executive order is that even though we have the law, which is certainly one of the most progressive in the nation, we have a framework that is much broader and much more holistic so that we can take a whole of government approach to considering environmental justice. And it helps us reach those considerations that are not reached in the law for the permitting and siting of facilities. So for our framework in looking at how we advance environmental justice through the executive order, we look at communities of concern, which are those that are overburdened communities, but also a broader umbrella of looking at those that may be carless households and other measures of demographic and socioeconomic distress. The second category is to look at the absence of environmental and public health benefits. And this is when we get the opportunity to look at things like tree canopy, the quality of parks, the quantity of parks, and the access to those spaces. And then finally, to look at the presence of disproportionate environmental and public health stressors. And with all three of those things considered together, the overlay of those helps us identify environmental justice communities in our state. And I'm delighted to say that under the umbrella of the executive order, we have formed an environmental justice interagency council, whereby every executive branch, department, and agency has selected a liaison to convene so that we can take a holistic approach to addressing environmental justice concerns that are on the ground in communities all around the state. And next, I just want to briefly touch on some of the components of the environmental justice law. So the environmental justice law recognizes that because environmental standards are often formulated based on the effect pollution has upon general populations spread over wide geographic areas, existing environmental laws fail to fully consider the impacts that certain pollution generating facilities have on their local communities. And that this failure has created pockets of high pollution across New Jersey, where many pollution generating facilities have become concentrated in predominantly minority and low income communities that may lack the financial and political power to shape their local landscape and avoid disproportionate adverse impacts upon their public health and the environment. And so with that in mind, the law itself addresses 8 specific types of facilities. And those 8 types of facilities are listed there, including major sources of air pollution, incinerators, sludge processing facilities, scrap metal facilities, landfills, and some medical waste incinerators. There are certain classes of permits that are covered by the law, including solid waste and recycling, development permits such as wetland, CAFRA, and flood hazard permits, water supply and pollution, air pollution, and pesticides. And the final consideration for the environmental justice law is if that facility or where the permit is proposed is located in an overburdened community. And I want to spend some time talking about what an overburdened community is. So according to the law, an overburdened community is a block group that meets at least one of the following criteria. It has to be a block group where at least 35% of the households are low income, or at least 40% minority, or at least 40% limited English proficient. And the block group only has to meet one of those 3 criteria. So with this map here, which is also available on our Office of Environmental Justice website, you'll see the color coding here to see which block groups within our municipalities meet 1, 2, or all 3 criteria. And so here you will see the URL for our Office of Environmental Justice website. And these are the suite of tools that are available that you can find on the website. You'll find an actual Excel spreadsheet that gives you the primary source data for each of the block groups that have been identified as overburdened communities. You'll find an interactive mapping tool whereby you can actually type an address or a place into the bar and see if it falls within the boundaries of an overburdened community. We also have PDFs for each municipality, which I'll show you in the next slide. We have a downloadable GIS layer, as well as frequently asked questions, technical notes, and other resources. So we wanted to provide information in formats that would be really great for those who are very comfortable and very savvy with maps, versus those who may be more comfortable with just finding their municipality and downloading a document that they can just print out in the form of a PDF and hang it on a wall in their municipal building by way of example. So in looking at the functionality for the PDF maps, when you go to the website, you'll see a link where every county is listed, and you can click on the link for the particular county and then see a drop-down menu of the municipalities in that county that have overburdened communities within their borders. So since I'm talking to those of you who have interest in Northwest New Jersey, I have Phillipsburg here as an example. And you can see from the map here that there are block groups within the municipality of Phillipsburg that have been designated as overburdened communities. And I want to use an opportunity here for you to see that it is not the totality of Phillipsburg. It's not the whole municipality that has been identified as overburdened. It's just the block groups that are highlighted here with a color. So these are the block groups where the environmental justice law will be applicable. And so, of course, since we're all New Jerseyans, I have to give an example from our capital city. And so here we see the city of Trenton, which has a lot more block groups that are designated as overburdened communities. So I wanted you just to see something that was on the other spectrum with a lot more representation of overburdened communities with multiple colors. So you see shades of green here with minority populations being the reason why a block group is selected versus those that are there because of 2 criteria being low income and minority. And then you see there are just, I see like 1 or maybe 2 there where there is a block group that has 3 criteria that are met, being low income, minority, and limited English proficient as the reason why. And in addition, in our mapping tool, if you click on one of the actual block groups, it will tell you the criteria that were met. and the reason why that particular block group was noted as being an overburdened community. And what you will notice if you play with the tool is even if it's highlighted for one of the criteria, it will still tell you what the percentages are for the other two criteria, even if it doesn't actually meet it, just so you have all that information at your disposal. And this mapping tool is already available on our website right now. So certainly feel free to take advantage of that. Within the environmental justice rulemaking process, we've held a series of meetings over the past 8 months, whereby we're trying to work out some of the finer elements of the rule that will need to be settled before the law goes into effect. So Julia is one of many people who were a part of those meetings over the course of 8 months weighing in. So we certainly heard from a Highlands perspective and a Delaware River watershed perspective. So thank you, Julia, and to the many others who are a part of those conversations. So at this point, we're looking at publishing the rules late this year or early next year, and certainly hoping to have those rules adopted in 2022. And that is when this law will go into full effect. So for right now, if everyone could just be on standby to look for the publishing of those rules to come in the register, we look forward to getting your feedback on that, short of us adopting the rules subsequently. And so I wanted to bring in this map here to just show you. I know that oftentimes when we talk about environmental justice, we think of places like Newark, Trenton, Camden, Patterson, and Atlantic City. But in our state, there are 331 municipalities that have overburdened communities within their borders. And so with that, that's more than half of our state. It's urban, suburban, and rural communities. And when I look at the footprint here of Highlands water that's supplied to areas outside of the Highlands, you see how vast this stretches out. So I think that for our considerations, as we're talking about the water issues and how we advance with the implementation of the environmental justice law, it's important for those of us who are the planners, the practitioners, the environmental professionals, to consider the impacts to the Highlands, but also consider how the Highlands region impacts those many municipalities that fall outside the border of the Highlands themselves. And just for a zoom in as one example, this is a map that is showing overburdened communities within the Highlands region, within the Upper Delaware Watershed Management Area. So in just this one watershed management area, you can see that there are municipalities with overburdened communities within their boundaries. And overall, there are 32 municipalities in the Highlands that have overburdened communities within their borders. And if we're looking at zooming out from just this particular watershed management area, if we're looking at communities that are both overburdened and in the Delaware River watershed, there are 9 municipalities that meet both criteria. So looking overall at communities that are in the Delaware River watershed, we have 37 municipalities. So 37 municipalities for the overlay between the Highlands and the Delaware River watershed. And you look at that compared to overburdened communities where there are 32. This has to become a shared conversation in which this is as much a priority. So as much as we talk about the Delaware River watershed in the Highlands, this is the same level of significance that this conversation about overburdened communities and environmental justice should have. So as we look at next steps, it is truly my hope that for those of you who are signed on to today's session, that we begin to think about opportunities that there may be for us to have further dialogue about what does environmental justice look like in the Highlands, to make sure that when these rules are published, that we're reaching deep into the communities to know the residents who are impacted by this and to know the key stakeholder groups that can help us further this word so that as we get to the point that we're implementing the environmental justice law, we are truly hearing from all of our communities. and for those issues that are not reached by the environmental justice law, the larger umbrella of the environmental justice executive order. I'm hoping that we can take a look at some of those things and also consider how we can service our communities all across the state to further environmental justice for everyone. So for my closing slide, I want to provide you with the URL to our Office of Environmental Justice. And if you go there, you can find the mapping tool that I just highlighted. And in addition, you can find links to all of the previous stakeholder meetings that we held. So if you want to catch up on what's been going on, this is a great window of opportunity before the draft rules are published in the Register. In addition, on that website, you can find the environmental justice law, you can find the environmental justice executive order, and you can also find the guidance document whereby all of state government is working together to further the promise of environmental justice for all of our residents. So with that, I will stop presenting there, and I look forward to answering any questions anyone may have.
Thank you, Olivia. That was very informative and insightful. And we have some time for some questions. So I invite participants to type out their questions in the chat. We have Zach backstage monitoring them, and we'll ask Olivia. But I have a couple questions to start us off. Olivia, where are the less obvious EJ communities located, such as in rural areas, or where we might find them?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you, I'm going to hold it up so you can see. This is my homework in preparing for today. I went and I got a list of all the municipalities that are in the Highlands and went through and looked at which ones were overburdened communities and which ones fall in the Delaware River watershed. And so in the Highlands, in the New Jersey Highlands, there are 32 municipalities that have overburdened communities within their borders. So I'll give you an example of some of those. In Passaic County, we have Bloomingdale, Pompton Lakes, Ringwood, and Wanacue. In Somerset County, we have Bedminster and Bernards Township. In Sussex County, we have Franklin Borough and Hapatcong Borough, and a few others, Mount Arlington and Mount Olive, and Roxbury Township. And in Bergen County, we have Mawa. So there are plenty of overburdened communities. So 10% of the state's overburdened communities are located in the Highlands. So I think, as we're looking ahead, thinking about how do we address this as a state, I think that certainly looking at this particular region is an area of conversation that we should all embark on. And I'll tell you, one of the things we talk about at DEP is making sure that it's not just the communities that we presume are overburdened communities like Newark, Patterson, Trenton, and Camden. We want to make sure that the intent of this law reaches all 331 municipalities that have overburdened communities within their borders.
And I can tell you by your list of Delaware Watershed Highlands municipalities, very few of those you've mentioned are urbanized communities.
Right.
So that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. If I might, I would just suggest if attendees who are listening in, go to the DEP Office of Environmental Justice website and go to the page where you can see the PDFs of municipalities, because when it's zoomed out and you're looking at the map as a state, it's at a block group level. So you really can't see it very clearly when you're looking at it in that totality. Pretty much the New Jersey Turnpike corridor is what strongly lights up. But I would say go and look at the PDFs by click on the county, then go to the municipalities, and then you can really see on the ground, what does this look like in the Highlands and in the Delaware River watershed.
And what's the minimum size of a community that would be considered overburdened? Is it a geographic scope?
Yes, it's the census block group.
Okay.
So what we were trying to get at in the law with the designation of block groups and not going at the municipal level is understanding that sometimes the issues are so hyper localized that it can be diminished when you look on a scale that's too large. So we wanted the ability to go to a census level that is very granular, where we're engaging with communities. So that was our intention. So it's the census block group level
Gotcha.
is the scale. Mhm.
Now, a concern I've heard expressed many years by many um, officials in poorer communities is who are looking for to purchase open space like any community would want to, is that the urban poor communities are at a disadvantage because they don't have the funds available to make the required match for state or county funding. Does
Mhm.
any of the initiatives by the governor address that?
Some of the work that we're doing in the department right now, under the umbrella of the executive order, we're
Mm-hmm.
looking to address that. So the executive order directed us to create a guidance document, and the guidance document said, specified that we're going to do an initial assessment and action plans. So where we are right now is that DEP is finalizing its initial assessment, and then we're going to pull in all the other departments and agencies to complete initial assessments as well. But we're walking through that process ourselves first, and then we'll have a whole document whereby we're specifying some of those challenges, and definitely some of those fiscal considerations, and acquisition of open spaces in urban areas is on the list of challenges. So Green Acres was actually one of our pilot programs for our whole department to give examples of some of the challenges that exist and some proposed mechanisms to overcome them. So when the initial assessment is published statewide, we anticipate that it'll be sometime in early 2022, likely in the late spring, that we're looking to publish that initial assessment document where it will specify just that. And then subsequent to that, we're going to develop action plans, or we're going to target how we're going to address some of those concerns. So you'll definitely see that coming out.
Great, great. And as far as the new EJ regulations that are soon to be proposed, I mean, we've identified who the over, where the, what the overburdened communities are and where they're located. What
Yes.
will, what will actually be the permit um, new requirements that will attempt to um, provide equity and justice in the permitting process? What are some of the
Mhm.
details? Can you let us know them, or what's being proposed?
Mhm. Yes, and it's a great question. So, looking at the law itself, what it enables us to do is be able to deny permits for new facilities that are coming in if we show that it's going to add additional stressors on an overburdened community. And for facilities that already exist, when they're looking to do a renewal or an expansion, we can put conditions on those permits, or on those facilities. So the law gives a framework for us setting up a process for an environmental justice initial assessment, where the applicant for the respective permit or the facility has to engage with the community. And here we go back again to that block group level, with the community that that facility would be sited in. And so through the rulemaking process, we're trying to lay out what the whole framework of what that process is. And from our stakeholdering, we got some really good feedback to inform what we want to put into the rules. We're working on finalizing the rules right now. But when the rules come out, that is something that those who are listening in should take a close look at. So, of course, we're still working it out. We're still in our internal deliberations after getting that feedback. But certainly, when you see those rules published, let us know if it resonates with you, if it makes sense, or if you think there's something we missed. Certainly, feel free to give us weigh in on that at that time, and we'll, do what we can to address those concerns in advance of formally adopting the rules.
Well,
So
you have
everything. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I just wanted to underscore that everything can't be denied. It's only new facilities that can prospectively be denied. For those facilities that already exist, that are coming in for renewals and expansions, we cannot deny them. All we can do is put conditions on the permits. So I just want to make sure that distinction is really clear.
I see. Well, that's important because my follow-up question was, it seems like this addresses the siting of new facilities, but what about where we have a community that has just been saturated with these risky facilities, and you can put conditions on them, you
Yes.
can't deny them.
Right. Right. And certainly, there's opportunities with even just renewals, and expansions to look at new technologies that have been developed. I mean, especially if it's been 20 years since someone has come in before, a lot has happened, in the past 20 years. So it definitely provides a window of opportunity to have discussion. And I think it even provides opportunities for there to be a greater level of connectivity between the business community and the local community where it's sited. So, I'm from Camden, right? And so, for me being from the city of Camden, a part of me talking about being from the city is I talk about Campbell Soup and I talk about RCA Victor Talking Company and other industries that were there. We need industry in our communities, but we need industry to be there helping support a triple bottom line of social, economic, and environmental benefits. And that's just the culture. That's the kind of cultural shift that we want to look to push, where residents feel like the businesses, the industries that are there are a part of the fabric of the community, not operating in isolation from the community's concerns.
Right. And I imagine some of these facilities employ people in the community as well, which is an important consideration. So if they can be made cleaner, have less negative impacts, that could be a good thing.
Yes. And I do just want to say also, this is one of the reasons why I'm really glad that we don't just have the law, that we also have the executive order. So it's not that our hands are tied if it does not meet the permit requirement or the facility type requirement. There is still a venue for communities to bring their environmental injustice concerns to our department and to other state departments under the umbrella of the executive order.
Can you talk about other agencies of the state aside from the DEP that this would impact their work considerably and have an opportunity to create positive change?
Yes, the way the executive order is written, and for anyone who's listening in, if you want to look up that, it's on our OEJ website, but the executive order number specifically is EO 23. And so in that executive order, it directs every state department and agency, as well as its boards, councils, and commissions, to consider ways that they can further environmental justice within their own agencies. So the initial assessment that we're working on in our own department right now, we're trying to lay the groundwork for how every other department and agency can follow suit with us. So we're going through it now. We've been doing it for several months, and we're getting close to the finish line with it. And we've already been in conversations with actually all of the departments and agencies. I have personally talked to every department and agency in our state in one-on-one meetings to talk about where they are with environmental justice considerations, and then how do we take some of the things that they may do as discrete functions and weave it into a concerted strategy to help all of our communities across the state. And so transportation, go ahead.
Sounds like there might be a significant role for the Highlands Council.
Yes. And so as being, certainly closely aligned with our department, there's certainly the opportunity there. Absolutely. And so I was going to give one example, like with the Department of Transportation. They have some initiatives that are already in place that are actually learning opportunities for us. So you asked about the Green Acres example, like with the open space funding. one of the things we've been looking at are sometimes the capacity issues that exist in distressed municipalities coming in to either apply for grants, or if they do receive the grant, the ability to see it all the way through to the end. So the Department of Transportation actually came up with a really good program where they have a few consultants that provide technical assistance to municipalities that have some of those capacity challenges. And it's something that we're looking at for lessons that we can learn in our Green Acres program and even beyond, to not be like this big bureaucracy that is challenging to navigate when you need some help. So we're looking at ways to learn from that, because DOT has definitely seen some benefits on the ground and how they've been able to be a stronger resource to distressed municipalities. And that's just one example of many that's starting to come up through these conversations.
Great. I see there are some questions coming in from participants, and why don't I ask Julia if she would like to read some of these questions to Olivia?
I'm happy to do that. From Olivia, from Ann Jacobson, she asks, for New Jersey's land trusts that have historically focused on protecting open space around the state, how would you suggest that they, quote unquote, pivot and begin to build environmental justice into their work?
Mm-hmm.
Not an easy question.
It's not an easy question. And I can tell you firsthand, it's not easy work. But it's deeply rewarding. So I can tap into my own experience. I worked for New Jersey Conservation Foundation for several years, and I was their South Jersey Metro Regional Manager, working out of an office in Camden. And I can tell you that it had been decades of work that had been ongoing, where we were trying to just like reach a critical point of culmination to actually see tangible results on the ground, like a result that a community resident could see. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of intentionality. And I would say, to start with some of the urban centers that may be within your catchment area. So I'll give you by way of example. It's not just necessarily doing work in the municipality. If you have the ability to do that work with an urban community, that's awesome. But also consider how you may have visitation in some of the lands you protect from those communities. So when I was working with the State Park Service, when I was doing the urban initiatives and outreach, I went to every single one of our parks that had a swim area, because when you see our swim areas and our picnicking areas in the summer in New Jersey state parks, our staff may not necessarily reflect New Jersey's diversity, but our visitation there definitely does. So in thinking about how we can find ways to foster more belonging for when people come to visit those areas, thinking about how we translate the signage, how we do the recruitment of seasonals for those locations, and even ultimately, when the opportunities present themselves, who we hire to work in these locations. So I think it can go both ways. For the going into the communities, I would say be intentional, be strategic, and don't go in, purporting that you have all the answers. Listen. That is so important, to listen to communities and really get a sense of what they need. And I'll give one example and then I'll stop. Well, yet another example and then I'll stop. So I grew up in the Parkside neighborhood of Camden. And you can tell by the name of the neighborhood, it must have had parkland. And it did. Actually, at the time, the city's largest park was located within the borders of that community. And that park was only 6 blocks from where I lived. But I was not allowed to play in that park as a child, frankly, because I had good parents and it made a whole lot of sense because there was a lot going on in that park. Beautiful space, but lots of seedy activity where a parent shouldn't just let their child go. And certainly the route to get there was not one that would have been safe. And so, it's not just going in and preserving the land. It's also thinking about how is that land managed? How is it programmed? How is it operated? How do you get there? Does a community have to cross a highway? Do they have to cross railroad tracks? Is it a safe corridor? So there's lots of things that I think that make it complex, that require listening. But listening, and from the land trusts, a lot of intentionality and deep commitment. It takes a lot, but it is so rewarding. And I can tell you by way of example, if I'm allowed to say this as a state employee, I'm going to say that I think that New Jersey Conservation Foundation, by way of example, with what they've been able to do in Camden with Gateway Park and supporting the circuit trails, that is definitely one example of a good model. There are definitely others, but that one I can speak to personally.
Well, congratulations, because I know that it is now all open. That's fairly recent, right? But
yes,
and that is definitely due to a lot of your hard work when you were still at the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and since then. So I'm going to get into trouble, Elliot, if I ask Olivia another question, because I think our time is up.
I think that's about right, Julia. Olivia, I want to thank you for spending some time with us, explaining to us the implementation of the governor's executive order and the soon-to-be proposed rules. We look forward to working with you more on them and have you have great success in this position. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
definitely setting us up for you are a hard act for people to follow, Olivia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this
Thank
is a
you so
great
much.
beginning to our conference.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.